Hi, I wanted to share with you some of my recent learnings when I was trying to evaluate whether I should buy a rental property for my investments. And so there are many things that you'll have to take a look when you think of investing in a rental property. The biggest one is to look at the price. In this case, in this calculator, I'd like to demo how some of the metrics change based on various factors. So in the top, there are various factors that I have considered, and we will see how this changes. The biggest one to think of is like what is the price of the property that you are trying to buy. So in this case, I have put in the price of $150,000. So if this number changes to, let's say, $200,000, then all of my calculations change. So let's take an example. The property is of $150,000 and I expect a rent of around $1,000. And I expect that vacancy is going to be 1 month a year, or maybe let's say 0 months a year. Let's take the best case scenario. I'll at least get $1,000. I'll have zero vacancy. I'll get a $500 mortgage. And I will take the loan for this much amount, right? Which is I'm going to subtract 25% down from this and expect some amount of closing costs. So I calculate the loan amount. And I also will be paying every year some amount of loan back. So I'm going to divide this by 30, assuming I take a 30-year loan. And then I should expect some amount of expenses on this property. If it's a rental property, then there's going to be some amount of monthly expense. So in this case, I have said $100 of monthly expense. Every state has a different property tax, so you should expect that this is the amount of money that you'll pay to the government for property tax. And then you should expect some sort of rent appreciation because properties prices increase, the neighborhood becomes better, so you can assume some sort of a rent appreciation of 1.4% or something. So I can also say this is 1%. And I can, looking at historical data, I can change this to 1.4, 1.5%, and I can change even the home appreciation. You can look at historical trend and make this higher or lower. Based on that, all of the calculations in this document would change. So let's assume my home appreciates by 2%. My rental income by rent increase of 1.4% a year. Property tax is 1.8% a year of the property price. $100 a month I will keep aside for expenses. Yearly, I will pay some amount of money back to the bank. And let's say I start buying this property in 2019. So my cap rate in this situation comes out to be 8. So this is a pretty poor cap rate, and it should be around 12. So the reason why it's that low, because typically the rent in this case will be at least $1,400. I put it very low. So in this property, I'll at least get, if I get a $1,400 rent, then my cap rate is equal to closer to 12, which is what I want. So if it is actually that for $150,000, I'm going to get $1,000 rent per month, then my cap rate or capitalization rates, these are two big things that you should look out for. Your cap rate should be greater than or equal to or very close to 12 or higher, and your GRM rate, gross rate rent multiplier, should be less than 10. So in this case, I'm going to look at cap rate specifically. And so what I realize is that at this equation, my property is not a good investment, because if you look at it, yearly my cash flow is negative. So let's go through this. 150,000, I take a loan. So I have equity in the house, the amount of money that I paid down, and I expect to rent my on a year monthly basis $1,000, and then I have to pay homeowners association if the house does have a homeowners association fee. So this is monthly. miscellaneous expense that comes down from above. Property tax is calculated based on um, the property tax ratio here. Insurance is also calculated based on, like, you should take a look at what is, get a quote, you'll find out monthly how much insurance you have to pay. Then you have to pay property management fees, which is basically people who will maintain your properties, take care of your tenants in terms of issues at the house, get loan from, get rent from them, pay you the money. So they do all of this. So they charge you 7% of the rent approximately. So but this is different in different places. And then there's mortgage. You have to look at like how much mortgage you're getting. And then there's total expense, which you add up all of these expenses, and then you find out, oh, I'm gonna be every month spending $1067, but I'm only gonna get $1,000. So on a monthly basis, I'm down $67, or a yearly basis, $800. So overall, my return on investment is it's negative. I'm gonna lose money. I'm gonna be making money afterwards. So there's also return on equity and compounded growth that you can probably calculate. So in this case, a pretty poor negative cash flow property, you could for the next 8 to 10 years in this example not make any money. The only money you'll make is if you like decide to sell this house after 10 years, then you probably made money on the house, assuming your house appreciates. Many things can go wrong in terms of house not appreciating, so you'd have to look at that. So let's say what would make this property a good investment. So if this property makes, let's say, a $1,400 a month, and then let's say I should assume 1 month it'll be empty because it takes time to move people if you increase their rent, and to refill that house it probably needs a month. At max you should expect a month of empty property if it's in a good place. And in this case, if we see this, the cap rate is 11.2. So in this case, this property is a good investment. The GRM rate, which is basically to get a property price, divide by 12 times the monthly income, and the exact opposite is cap rate, 12 times the monthly rental income divided by the property cost. So if you have these ratios and these ratios looking healthy, so now let's assume that this was 10 years back, that this was the price of the property. Now the property price became $238,000 when you tried to buy it. And let's say you have to pay in $68,000. Then, and you expect 1 month of vacancy and $900 in mortgage because mortgage increased. And you expect the rent also increase, but the rent is like $1,650 or something. When that's the case, and of course the expenses will go up, let's assume these are similar. So in this case you see that the cap rate is like 8, which should be greater than 12 or equal to close to 12, very close to 12, and then GRM rate is 12, which should be less than 10. And we see that the cash flow of this property is that it's going to lose $2,000 on a yearly basis for the next many years. So actually it's going to lose money for the next 15 years in this case, if you assume this is a real example. Like at this point, for $238,000 property, I would end up paying $68,000 down, and that would be around 919 mortgage, and 150 is appropriate. And these are the recent rates for this state that I'm looking at. So in this case, we can clearly see that the yearly cash flow is negative for quite some time, which is pretty poor. Like you should assume that you'll be losing money, but the only reason why you invest in such a property is that at the end of it, you make you make good money on the appreciation of the house, assuming it appreciates, which is not a good idea. You shouldn't be buying house just for its appreciation case. But depends. Every investor is different. Someone would invest for a cash flow. Someone would invest for long-term property. But some kind of a calculation like this is necessary, where you look at like what are all the costs that you're going to be paying, what's the money that you expect to get, and what is the cap rate for this property. And if it's not close to 10 or 12, at least 12, try to 12, try to get to 12, and you only get to 12 if it's like a very low bear market. You're not going to get to 12. So this is something that you'd have to look at. So you can then look at like how you can increase the property price, how you can maybe pay lower closing cost, lower for the overall property. And if you do, then you can still see that somehow if you reduce this loan amount as well to let's say $140,000, and if you expect zero vacancy, and if you can go to 1725, then at the minimum you are cash flow positive. So this is possible. So in this case you'll be taking $140,000 loan. So in this case you can still make it cash flow positive, but as you can imagine, you're stretching it really hard. Like the renter is going to be paying $50 a month more. So this is not a best case scenario that you can expect to be positive. But in this case, if this is possible, then at least you're positive. But again, this is still too high, but that's what you'll get if it's in a bull market. Other key things that are important to consider is, as I said, the cap rate is important. Look at the school district. Is the community in a good place? If not, it's a problem. Many people will not come in if at least to rent if it's not in a good school district. Is the property cash flow positive? We looked into it. You have to know very clearly, are you buying it from a long-term cash flow, short-term cash flow, and long-term asset building, or is it just long-term asset building? And based on that, you can put in the money. You need to have some sort of insurance so that you protect yourself if in case someone tries to sue you. You need to look at historical rates for rent increase, property price increase by square footage. You can do a lot of calculation based on like what are the prices of properties that are selling nearby and how long does it take to sell them. You will probably get a good amount of tax implication, tax benefit here also, looks like based on my reading, and various kinds of deductions to save on taxes for yourself potentially. I'm not an expert here. I'm sharing some of my learnings, but this is by no means any advice. It's just documenting my learnings. You should do your own research, get an expert counselor for making any of these decisions and investments. You need to also make sure if you're not willing to pay a lot of time and energy, then you need to get a property manager or management. Pay the 7%. It's probably way worth the time so that you don't end up spending so much time. All of these investments make sense as long as you can leverage the bank's money, and you should expect around 6% of overall property price as fees in various expenses like property tax, insurance, property management, vacancies, repairs. And unless the area is doing really well, you should think really hard whether you want to buy the property, do the math, and that's it. Again, none of this is any advice. This is documenting my learnings. You should do your own independent research and get an expert advisor who's qualified to give advice here to make these investment decisions. There's a lot of videos out there. I try to do my own analysis, but this could be totally flawed in many ways. I might have made a bunch of terrible mistakes. It's hardly spent 4 to 5 hours total in trying to understand this. So this is by no means any way closer to truth, but at least help me understand whether I'm going to go forward with buying this decision or not. Hopefully this was useful. There are many videos out there who will educate you. So do that. Go through all of them. There's many things to look after. Okay, thank you. Hope you liked it.